So we're going to turn this over to Sally for a half hour so she can get off and get to class. Take it away, Sally.
So, as I said, I'm Sally Frank. I teach at Drake Law School, but I'm wearing my National Lawyers Guild hat today, although literally I gave the hat to someone else for the protest. The literal hat. And I apologize that I can't be here for the action, but I have a class that I have to teach at noon and one at 3. So, I have been doing legal observing and legal support for protesters for about 36 years. And so what I want to tell you is kind of generally what you might face and what's going on. I have to begin, though, because I'm a lawyer, I have to begin by advising you that my best legal advice is that you not violate the law. However, should you choose to ignore that advice, let me go ahead and tell you what the possible legal consequences are. And before I even do that, one of the things to think about in your language is that you're not going anywhere trying to get arrested. Your mission today is not to try to get arrested, because it would be really nice if the police and law enforcement recognized the righteousness of your cause and chose not to arrest you, right? Yes. So what you're doing is you are risking arrest. You're not planning going to try to get arrested. And that becomes important if you ever go to trial and they say, well, did you say you want to get arrested? Don't you want to get, no, you wanted to risk arrest. And you wanted to hope that law enforcement would for a change do the right thing. So the other thing, when I talk about civil resistance to other people, and people will sometimes say to me, it's just wrong to violate the law. Now this doesn't contrast with my comments about, my legal advice is to obey the law. But one of my responses when people say that is, did you ever speed? Did you ever park illegally? Then stop talking to me about it's never right to violate the law. You've done it too. And so just, you might want to keep that in mind. Now, I'm not sure exactly what your plans are, so I'm going to cover the three most likely scenario potential charges. One is disorderly conduct. That would likely come if you blocked construction vehicles, blocked a road, blocked entry or exit points. Another possibility is trespass. If you're on a property where an owner has invited you in, then you can't be trespassing. But if you then go on the easement that the owner has objected to, then by law, it's Dakota Access's property. So you could be charged with trespass. I understand that Jessica was charged with interference. So if you kind of get in the way of law enforcement or something of that nature, sometimes you get charged with interference.
Sally, what was the first one before trespass?
Disorderly conduct.
Thank you.
So all of those are simple misdemeanors. The maximum fine on a simple misdemeanor is $650. That doesn't mean that's what you will be fined, but we haven't had much experience in this county with the judges in this county, so I can't tell you what usually happens. A time or two from now, I'll be able to tell people what usually happens. But, so I just need to tell you what the maxes are. Rarely do judges do the max, unless you give sentencing statements like Frank does.
You got to keep trying. You got to keep trying.
The maximum jail sentence is 30 days. There are additional costs. In a trespass case, there's a $125 law enforcement fee. You get to help pay for the cost of arresting you. In an interference case, the minimum fine is $250. The others, the minimum fine is $65. But you need to understand that the minimum isn't really a minimum, because then there's 33 or 35% tacked on for the Crime Victims Fund. There's court costs, which if you plead at your first offense, it's probably about $50. If you're taken to the jails can now charge you rent, jail rent. It's the only place I know of where you will not be evicted if you refuse to pay the rent. And there can be some other, if you decide to go to trial, court reporter, well, you'd have a tape. If you decide on a jury trial, it would be a $100 jury fee. So these are just know that even if you're charged $65, it's more like $300.
Sally,
Yeah.
things like court costs and the jury fee, does that go away if your charges are dismissed?
Yes. If you're acquitted sometimes if the charges are dismissed, the deal from the prosecutor is if you pay court costs, we'll dismiss the charge. Otherwise, if you're acquitted or the charges are dismissed, then you don't have to pay those. The jail rent still becomes questionable. It's really important to have your support system, have somebody with bail money just in case. Usually they charge around $300 bail if they charge bail. They can also choose to give you like a desk appearance ticket that requires you to come back to court. But bail is normally for a simple misdemeanor $300, so you're going to want, I know there's been some collections, fundraising for this, but you might, if you have the money and can have somebody pay it for you, then there's that much more money left for people who don't have it. The other reason why it's really important to have a support system is the purpose of the system is to make you feel guilty for what you've done or what you're planning to do. And so you need your supporters around you who can remind you that what you did was for the environment, for future generations, and all the things you all said, because the system's going to try to make you feel like you did something wrong. And it's pretty good at doing that. I mean, because you just, especially if you've never been arrested before, it's very disconcerting. So, any court appearances, support people come. If there's a trial, certainly support people come. There are some special groups of people that should think extra hard before they decide to risk arrest. Minors, if you are under 18, make sure there is a parent or guardian available for you to be released to, because they won't just give you a desk appearance ticket and let you go off. If you're on parole or probation, an arrest could be, If you're on parole or probation, an arrest would likely be considered a violation of parole or probation, so you've got extra concerns there. If you are an immigrant but not a citizen, or if you're a dreamer, they have sometimes tried to, I know one dreamer who did a lot of civil disobedience actions, and they didn't renew her status. So you want to be careful. If you're undocumented, you have a lot of extra risks. Because the county jails check with ICE to see if you're documented or not. So I'm not telling you to do it or not do it, but I'm telling you to be aware of extra risks. I'd be irresponsible if I did not warn you of those things. Another thing I always like to warn people about, remember that if you are arrested, you will be searched. Anything you have on you will be found. Do not have anything on you you do not want to be found. You might want to check your pockets and your wallets and other things for some substance that you may or may not have once had and used and forgotten that it was there.
Especially that little front right teeny pocket.
They don't check your car, do they?
If they impound the car, if someone's ready to drive it back, you're fine. But if they impound the car, then they do what they call an inventory search to make sure nothing's lost. So don't have things on you you do not want the police to find. Even pocket knives, you don't want them to try to make an argument that you have a weapon or mace or any self-defense type stuff. Leave it behind, because they could bring extra charges even for a pocket knife. And obviously for some substances they will bring extra charges. So make sure you don't have those on you. Any questions about those before I get into a Know Your Rights piece? Because I really want to do that. Yeah.
Does a bondsman charge a percentage of the $300 bond as opposed to paying the full bond?
Generally, bonds people don't like doing simple misdemeanors because it's too much work for too little money. And you will get back the bond. If someone pays your bond for you, they will get that money back. If you pay it yourself, then they might apply it to fines and court costs. And I do think there has been...
This is assuming that you show up for court. court.
Assuming you show up for court.
That's the key, is you have to show
That's a
up.
whole different
You have to show
problem.
up for all of the appointments, yeah,
Well, I would have to say that it depends on the bondsman,
okay.
because I had to bond my kid out, and I lost $300.
Well, you want to ask what they charge and things, but I believe that there is a fund. What I'm suggesting is if you can afford to do it without the fund, then you're saving that money for people who can't. You might want to photocopy the labels. They're not going to most likely they will not let you bring your meds into a jail because you might have something else in there and, they're not going to charge you with possession if it's in a prescription bottle. But you may not get it back and you may not be able to keep it. So you want to make sure that there's evidence, consult with the doctor's office to fax it to the police or have someone ready to do that if you have meds.
Yeah, different counties have different policies on this. Best to have your support person, copies of the meds, and if you're overnight and spending more time, let them know you need it. That's really, you need an advocate, that's all.
Yeah.
And we've got some of that information here
Okay.
on these sheets for people to fill out.
I have a question. I have to wear a bite splint. Is that gonna? Are they
A
gonna
what?
a bite splint? Are they gonna try to take my bite splint or?
Just keep your mouth closed.
It
You're
depends,
asking quite a lot there.
it depends on the jail.
What's that?
It depends on, I don't know what the Polk County Jail is doing. You might get released without being processed into the jail. So
Just the hope.
that can happen too, yeah.
In previous actions elsewhere that I've been to, the training included strategies. For instance, like, don't just walk away with the police. Go limp
Okay.
and tie up like 4 or 5 of them carrying you to wherever.
That's a discussion for you all to have when I am done with the
Well-
legal discussion. The one thing to mention though that is if you do go passive, they can bring an interference charge against you. Whether or not that really is interference is questionable. But if you get them mad, you're less likely to get released with the desk appearance ticket, and there's a chance of that extra charge. But that is a strategic political decision for you all to discuss.
How about not showing identification?
I do recommend that you have a license with you if you're planning to risk arrest. If you don't let them know who you are, or they can't establish it, they can't give you a desk appearance ticket. If you're John or Jane Doe, your likelihood of returning to court on the date is very slim, right? So not providing them with identification, it makes you more likely to go to the jail. That's, again, up to you if you want to risk it, but it makes sense that if they can't establish who you are, you're not at high likelihood of returning. So I'm not urging for or against that either, I'm just, my concern is you all do things with your eyes open and know your risks. What you want to risk is up to you personally or up to the group discussion. What I want to do is make sure that you know what it is you're risking, so you make an informed choice. Okay, I'm not going to tell you to do one thing or the other, I just want you aware of what you're risking. Okay, for some people that makes sense. For some people, some actions at times people have done jail solidarity and refused to bail out and filled the jail. Just know that they're going to charge you jail rent if you do that. So you may or may not want to.
Then they're
Again,
going to
that's
keep you in
something
jail
to
longer
discuss.
if you don't have the money to pay it, right?
They do, and that's another reason for a jail solidarity, in solidarity with poor people who can't afford families. But again, you'll get charged higher jail rent. So I'm not, I'm not the one that's going, so it's not my decision to make. It's your decision to make and to discuss collectively with each other.
Could there be a possibility of not just criminal mischief? Could that be a potential charge? And what's the difference between that and the other disorderly conduct?
Okay. If there's any damage to property or something like that, you can get charged with criminal mischief. Depending on how expensive the damage is, depends on what level of crime it is. They have not amended the law to keep up with inflation, So it's really easy to get beyond simple misdemeanor if there's property damage, okay? And again, that's something for you all to discuss, and it may be something that, you know, people could get conspiracy things and stuff too, so if somebody, when there are plowshares actions, they're usually not thoroughly discussed openly and broadly.
This is kind of new to me. Is there always jail rent? I mean, I've never heard it of that before.
Iowa passed a statute that lets every county jail charge rent up to, I think it's $60 a day. And then there's an internal processing fee. The way the whole county jail, and I assume other jails consider jail time, is if you're admitted into the jail 1 minute to midnight and released 1 minute after, they will charge 2 days. You'll also get credit for 2 days served. I challenged that in one case where someone was there for 12 hours and got charged 2 days, and we at least got 1 day, got rid of one of the days. But, so, you know, the other thing that's important for you to know is there are people who take a principled position that they will not pay fines, they will not pay court costs, they will not pay for probation. You should know that probation, there's a fee for. If you do community service, they charge you a fee. The system in Iowa is an attempt to...
Pay as you go, you pay.
Yeah. The system in Iowa is to try to shift the costs of the criminal justice system onto those least able to pay, which is poor people. So everything you do, they charge for. If you do not pay, they will suspend your driver's license, even though this has absolutely nothing to do with driving. If you can't afford it right away, some counties do have payment plans that can be worked out, but you do need to know if you don't pay and you live in Iowa, they will not renew your license.
I haven't paid for years. They have not taken my license. That's up to them. They can, but they you can't own a car in the county. You gotta have, and you can't. If you have a job, they can take your money. If you have something in the bank, they can go after. If you got property, they can get it. Are you catching on here?
Tax refund.
First goes the money, then goes the person. So
just know there's a risk. There is a risk to your license, and certainly to re-registering your car and things if you don't pay the charges.
Can a non-driver ID be suspended?
No, because that's an identification. It's not a privilege or anything like that.
County specific?
How county
state
how county attorneys decide to collect and do things may be somewhat.
Well, I mean, I don't live in this county.
Oh, it's statewide for anything in the state. If you don't live in Iowa, then you've
But if
got.
you get arrested in this county, you would owe money to this county.
But the state will force.
Right.
What if you're from Nebraska? Just curious.
Well, then it would be whether Nebraska also has similar policies.
Wasn't there a court ruling just recently that you can't be held indefinitely for inability to pay fines?
That's been the Supreme Court position for a long time, but I'm not talking about holding you indefinitely in jail for not paying a fine. I'm talking about all the other ways they can collect. What they try to do is contempt of court for non-payment, and then they have to prove that you actually had the ability. My recommendation to people usually, even if there's no payment plan on the issue of the contempt part, is if you are not of the principal position that you won't pay fines, okay? And again, these are all political positions, and I'm not going to tell you what they should be. But if you do intend to pay and you just can't afford it, pay a little bit every week. It will be very hard to hold you in contempt for non-payment if you're paying a little every week and you walk into court and say, I couldn't afford it. If you pay nothing, they're going to look and say, did you ever buy a cup of coffee? Yeah.
Two things. Do they take credit cards? And the other is, at what point would police or whoever's there monitoring when would they resort to violence themselves?
Well, yes, you can pay by credit card. In terms of violence, it depends on every officer is different. Every action is different. There's always a risk, and that's why you are undergoing nonviolence training to learn how to respond if somebody is verbally or physically violent to you. That's part of what the purpose of this is, right? I can't really answer when police get violent, it, varies.
You shouldn't be surprised if they put the plastic cuffs on you really tight, or if they handle you roughly.
Yes. And, if you don't walk, I've seen police carry people by their handcuffed behind, like by their arms and stuff.
Right.
So, do let it be known if you're hurting. That doesn't mean they'll do anything, but make it known, because there could be a civil suit afterwards or something for it. I want to do a little bit of Know Your Rights training, because I'm very concerned. There have been police agencies in other cities that use arrests as an opportunity to question people. And because somebody, and I doubt it's anybody in this room, and I'm sure it wasn't sponsored by any organization in this room, but we know that there was some major property damage done, and that probably the FBI and others are going to want to do surveillance and get information. The other reason why they're going to do extra questioning is you all know that there is a civil suit in federal court trying to seek an injunction, and if they get it, they may want more names of people that they can add to it. Don't be surprised if you're arrested if you're added to that lawsuit. But
Added to the lawsuit house.
they could amend it. They have John and Jane Doe's right now. They can amend it to add defendants. But this is what you need to answer if you want to hope to get released. Okay? Your name. As I said, if you don't give your name, your address, or anything else, you are a very bad likelihood of returning. And that is the only real legitimate use for bail, is to ensure that you return to court. So your name, your address, telephone number, social security number, date of birth, and then a little bit of ties to the community in terms of, do you have a job? Do you have a spouse? Do you have children? Those kind of questions are all legitimate. Lawyers call it pedigree information, okay? And you can see why they would all relate to, can we release you?
Yeah, just, that's a little bit ahead. If you're in jail tonight and they have a charge, they'll set up bail. You could get out. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you're not in front of a judge trying to make a case.
Yeah, but if you don't give them your name or address
Oh,
or
yeah.
information
They're not
about who
going.
you are, they're not gonna release you.
Right.
So that's what, you can still decide to be a John or Jane Doe. I'm not telling you you can't. I'm just telling you that, But if they start asking you about anything else, if they start asking you about motives, if they start asking you about who else is in the movement, if they start asking you if you know anything about vandalism, any other questions you can refuse to answer, okay? It is a crime to lie to the police. It's a crime to lie to federal officials. It is your constitutional right to refuse to answer the questions.
Do the
So-
bankers know this?
Yeah, right. Well, that's why Martha Stewart went to jail for 6 months. She was charged with lying, or she was convicted of lying, not of other things. So, just,
get a free pass.
I know, you guys are not gonna get the free ride, okay? You're not gonna get your powerful. So, I know there's a tendency, if they ask you something that you think is silly or stupid or whatever, and you give a flippant answer, that flippant answer could be used to charge you with lying to the police. So if they start asking these things, remember, you have a right to just say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that question. It is a very difficult thing to do because we have all been raised to be polite, right? All of us have been taught to be polite, to, respond to authority figures, answer questions. When I teach my students, it's really hard for them to interrupt the other side and say object because, you've been taught not to interrupt. So just remember, this is your right. You can even say on advice of counsel, I refuse to answer. And then they may threaten you that they'll subpoena you to a grand jury and you can say, if you do, you do. I'm not answering these questions.
You were talking about chances of being released based on your proof of identity. I have an out-of-state driver's license. I moved here.
That's still a proof of identity. It's accepted by TSA.
But I mean, being able to actually say, okay, this is my address, even though I have no proof that that's my address?
Well, you know, you can say you recently moved.
I've got a photo ID.
You know,
They'll believe you or not, they'll probably believe you if you're sincere, you know, but it's better to tell the truth.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because they can look that up if they have to.
yes.
Don't you also have to verbally state that you're invoking your right to remain silent? Just being silent isn't enough?
No, only if you, the only one is invoking your right to counsel. That one you have to verbally say. But, you know, if you want them to stop asking you questions, if you sit mute, instead of saying, I'm not going to answer that, then, you know. But just make it a mantra, I'm not going to answer that, I'm not going to answer that, I'm not going to answer your questions, you know. And as I say, if they choose to bring you to a grand jury, they'll choose to bring you to a grand jury, and then we'll talk about grand jury rights in the grand jury. But you increase the likelihood the more you talk. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but backtracking a little bit about Branstad running in the state patrol, are there if we were to be arrested by state patrol versus a county officer, is there a difference in any of this, or?
No, because things like desk appearance tickets are at the discretion of law enforcement. My understanding is that this county has been fairly responsive and is planning to be reasonable, but if they're overwhelmed, who knows what they'll do? That could be an urge to get rid of everybody quickly, or it could be an urge to fill a jail. I don't know. You know, have your outside support person with the necessary phone numbers to make calls if you need to. If you need a caller to work tomorrow, they're not going to be able to make it, or whatever. Have your outside support person able to make those calls.
Sally, hi.
Hi.
You might want to repeat the question. Sometimes it's hard to get the questions back here.
Oh, okay. The question was, if you're arrested by a state trooper instead of by the county, will that change? And I think there's been discussion with the county and not with the state troopers, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything discussed is going to be carried out or anything, yeah.
Can you be arrested by someone off duty?
Yes.
An off-duty officer?
They do it all the time.
We didn't get a question.
I'm sorry, can you be arrested by an off-duty law enforcement? Yes. I mean, if you think about a cop that comes across a robbery and decides to arrest a person, they can do that. Another piece of Know Your Rights is if you're stopped in your car, or if you're just stopped, if they ask, can we search your car, you have an absolute right to say no. Now, don't physically try to interfere with their search, because you don't want an interference charge, but make it absolutely clear that you do not consent if you don't want to consent. They'll start, well, why? Do you have something to hide? And, you know, a ton of other things. And you can just say, I believe in exercising my rights. You know, I believe in the Fourth Amendment, and I don't want to waive it. And it's a matter of principle to me. Okay? If you're stopped just on the street, again, you can object to a search, but don't physically try to prevent it. In Iowa, if you're not arrested, but you're just on the street, you have no legal obligation to provide identification or to answer who you are. However, the police do not understand that. Okay?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
If you are not, I'm not talking about under arrest, and I'm not talking about a driver. A driver has to produce their license so they can drive. But if you're just walking down the street, and a police officer comes over and says, give me your name, you have no legal obligation to answer. You have no legal obligation to provide identification. However, as I said, the police refuse to understand that.
They don't like that at all.
They hate it, they refuse to understand it. So, you know, it depends on your risk aversion, on whether or not you want to, you know, if they threaten you with arresting you for interference, you know, you have a constitutional right that we can then advocate in the courts for, but it's up to you whether you want to risk arrest to exercise those rights, okay? But if you're driving, then you have to show license. If If you're the passenger, again, you don't have to identify yourself. Police don't believe that. So it's kind of like the guy who was arrested for the flag thing, right? Even a federal court has said this law is completely unconstitutional, unenforceable, and there's still cops who decide to arrest over it. So, yeah.
So in North Dakota, at Standing Rock, a car was stopped into blockade, and they asked the name of every person in the car, and one of the young women had a warrant out for her arrest. Was it legal for them to ask, and she got arrested?
Well, it's legal for police to ask you anything in, okay, in North Dakota, they stopped a car at the roadblock before where the camp is, and they asked everybody for identifying information, and it turned out one of the people in the car, not the driver, had a warrant out, and they arrested him. The question is, was it legal to ask? The police can ask anything they want. They can ask, the question is it legal for you to refuse to respond? More than is it legal for the police to ask? So, and what I'm saying is, it is legal for you to say, I'm not going to answer. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case on it that said, as a general rule, if there is a statute that requires you to identify yourself when asked by the police, then that's legal. There can be times when the Fifth Amendment would say, you know, you have a right to withhold it. Iowa has no such statute. When you refuse to answer that question, they charge you with interference. But as I say, I want you to know, one, it's your legal right, but second, that exercising it could still spend you and get you a night in jail and a legal case to establish that you were exercising your right.
Excuse me, you said Iowa has no such what?
Statute that says that people have to identify themselves if the police ask. So therefore, that Supreme Court decision doesn't apply. I had a discussion with a judge about this once that I thought, of course, later about the good response, where he was like, well, doesn't the person was interfered, doesn't it make the police's job harder? And it's kind of like, yeah, so does refusing to confess, but it's your right. So those are things to think about. I would also be very...
We're short of time, Sally.
Okay. I'm going to just do a few more minutes. I did ask for like 45
You
yesterday.
did, but we're done with the non-violent in 45, non-violent training, all of it, 45 minutes.
Okay,
So
5 more
we're-
minutes and I'll be done.
That's good, thank you.
Okay, so a couple other things. Be aware of agent provocateurs.
Yeah.
Frequently, the way they work, if you kind of look at all the terrorism cases against Muslims in the U.S., probably somebody flippantly said something incendiary, and then the informant undercover agent took them and acted like it was their word and gave them all the means to go forward with their flippant statement, and then they get charged with conspiracy to engage in terrorism. So, and the reason is because the person's not going to back off after they publicly said, oh, I wish we could do this. Well, what if you can? Beware of that. Don't get drawn into doing something you do not want to do. It's dangerous, and I would bet that there are provocateurs. We know Dakota Access is interested. I'm not saying don't trust each other, but be mindful of your own legal safety.
Don't be flippant. Harder than I thought.
Or even if you are going to be flippant and somebody starts acts like they should take you up on your word, say no if you were being flippant, if you're not interested. Yeah.
You're assuming it starts with a flippant remark. The provocateurs suggest.
Sometimes they suggest, sometimes it's a flippant remark, because if they suggest it, you know. But anyway, don't get drawn into something you don't want to get drawn into, okay? That's just basic. The other thing is about trials. For those of you who do want to risk arrest, you can choose to plead guilty at your first opportunity. You can choose to go to trial. There's nothing inconsistent with civil resistance or civil disobedience about going to trial, except that it costs more. But you can test, everybody has the right to make the government prove their case. If you're going to go to trial, I kind of recommend a jury trial, because what's the point if you're just going to a judge? It does cost more, but if you're going to do it because you want to expose more people to the issues, and you're gonna bring in the videotape that you all have taken of the action and things like that, you might as well have a jury. So it takes longer, it takes more commitment in terms of more days off from work or whatever, appearing in court. I don't know that we have lawyers ready to represent. I'm certainly willing and able to assist someone who's representing themselves, but I'm not sure that I can actually come to Boone and do a long trial. But it's something to consider. There may be other lawyers who are willing to do that representation out here. And I'm sure there are more questions, and I'm going to stand kind of in that aisle for a little while, so if someone has specific questions about their legal situation, feel free to come up.
Thanks, Sally. Wonderful job. So we're truncating this thing, meaning making it even shorter than we intended it to be.